I believe that he was murdered. Well, I was shocked. And I wondered how it had happened. Because as far as I was concerned, I was sure he was going to appeal.
Years before his death, Michael Jackson made comments that many people brushed aside at the time. He spoke about pressure. He spoke about feeling targeted. He spoke about powerful interests operating behind the scenes. For some people, those statements sounded like the frustrations of a global superstar dealing with controversy. But for others, especially after years of Hollywood scandals and shocking revelations involving some of the entertainment industry's most powerful figures, those words began to sound very different. Today, Michael Jackson remains one of the most discussed celebrities in modern history. Not just because of his music or his legendary career, but because so many questions still surround the final chapters of his life. Questions about the people around him, questions about the industry he spent his entire life inside, and questions about whether the public truly understands what he was trying to say during his final years. As more stories emerge about how fame, power, and influence operate behind closed doors, many people have started revisiting Michael's life through a completely different lens. They wonder if there were warning signs hidden in plain sight. They wonder whether his struggles were unique or part of a much larger pattern that affects some of the biggest stars in the world. And once you start looking closely at the story, you realize that Michael Jackson's journey may be far more complicated than most people ever imagined. Long before the controversy, before the lawsuits, and before the endless debates that would dominate headlines for years, Michael Jackson was simply a child with extraordinary talent. From an incredibly young age, he was performing in front of massive audiences, living a life that most children could never understand. While other kids were spending time with friends, attending school events, or enjoying simple moments of childhood, Michael was traveling the world, recording music, and carrying the expectations of an entire industry on his shoulders. As his fame exploded, so did the demands placed upon him. He wasn't just becoming successful, he was becoming one of the most recognizable human beings on the planet. Every move he made attracted attention, every appearance became global news, every decision was analyzed and criticized. Over time, Michael often spoke about feeling as though he had missed out on the normal experiences that most people take for granted. Supporters point to this loss of childhood as one of the defining factors that shaped his personality later in life. It also helps explain why he created Neverland Ranch, a place designed to capture the innocence and joy he felt had been taken from him during his early years. To many fans, Neverland represented an attempt to reclaim something he never truly had. But as his fame continued growing, Michael found himself operating inside a world few people ever get to see. A world filled with powerful executives, enormous financial interests, and constant public scrutiny. And according to some observers, that environment would eventually begin changing him in ways that became impossible to ignore. But the pressure of superstardom was only the beginning of the challenges he would face. By the early 1990s, Michael Jackson had achieved a level of success that seemed almost impossible. His albums broke records. His concerts sold out around the world. His influence stretched across continents. Yet, despite his incredible achievements, a series of allegations suddenly changed everything. What followed was one of the most intense media storms any celebrity had ever experienced. Headlines dominated newspapers. Television coverage became relentless. Public opinion became deeply divided. While critics viewed the allegations as serious and deserving of investigation, Michael maintained his innocence and repeatedly argued that he was being unfairly targeted. What made the situation even more traumatic for him were the investigations that followed. Michael publicly described feeling humiliated by the procedures he was forced to undergo, including highly invasive examinations that became major news stories. For many fans, this period marked a turning point. They believe it fundamentally changed the way Michael viewed the media, law enforcement, and the powerful institutions surrounding him. Friends and associates later described him as becoming increasingly guarded, more suspicious, and less trusting than before. Whether someone believes Michael's perspective or not, there is little disagreement that these events had a profound effect on his emotional well being. The public image he had spent decades building was now under constant attack, and every aspect of his life became subject to scrutiny. As the years passed, Michael increasingly spoke about feeling persecuted and misunderstood. Supporters argue that this growing distrust didn't appear out of nowhere. They believe it was the result of years spent battling forces far larger than himself. And according to some observers, those feelings would only intensify as Michael found himself facing new battles against some of the most powerful people in entertainment. As Michael entered the later stages of his career, his attention increasingly shifted away from music alone and toward the business side of the entertainment industry. This was where some of his most controversial statements began to emerge. During public appearances and speeches, Michael openly criticized certain executives and corporate structures that he believed exploited artists. One of the most talked about examples involved his highly public dispute with major industry figures during conflicts surrounding music, ownership, and business agreements. Michael argued that artists often generated enormous wealth while powerful corporations maintained control over the assets and profits created by their work. His comments attracted widespread attention because very few entertainers of his stature were willing to publicly challenge such influential organizations. Fans viewed him as someone exposing uncomfortable truths. Critics argued that he was frustrated by business disputes and speaking emotionally. Regardless of which interpretation people accepted, one fact remained clear: Michael was no longer staying silent. He appeared increasingly determined to speak openly about issues he believed were affecting not only himself but many performers throughout the industry. Over time, these statements became an important part of the mythology surrounding his later years. Supporters point to them as evidence that Michael felt trapped inside a system he no longer trusted. Others view them as the words of a celebrity under extraordinary pressure. But either way, the conflict added another layer to an already complicated story. As his public battles continued, so did the speculation surrounding his relationships, his finances, and his state of mind. And by the time the world approached 2009, Michael Jackson was preparing for what many believed would be the greatest comeback of his career. Yet, behind the scenes, concerns were already beginning to emerge. By the late 2000s, Michael Jackson's life had entered a period filled with uncertainty. While the public still saw him as one of the most famous entertainers in history, people close to the situation described a man carrying enormous pressure behind the scenes. Years of legal battles, constant media attention, and financial obligations had created challenges that few outsiders fully understood. At the same time, Michael was attempting something that many believed was impossible: a return to the very top of the entertainment world. When the This Is It concerts were announced, excitement spread across the globe almost instantly. Tickets disappeared at record speed, and fans viewed the shows as an opportunity to witness one final chapter from a performer who had shaped modern music. On the surface, everything appeared to be falling into place. Yet, reports from rehearsals and people working around the production painted a more complicated picture. Some described Michael as energized and determined, while others expressed concerns about exhaustion and the physical demands of preparing for such an ambitious series of performances. As the rehearsals continued, stories emerged about long hours, intense schedules, and growing pressure to deliver a comeback unlike anything the world had ever seen. Supporters later argued that too much responsibility had been placed on one individual, particularly someone who had already spent decades living under extraordinary stress. Others maintained that Michael remained committed to proving he could still perform at the highest level despite the challenges. Regardless of which perspective people believe, one thing became clear: enormous expectations surrounded every aspect of the comeback. Millions of fans were waiting. Financial interests were involved. The media was watching closely, and as the countdown to the concerts continued, almost nobody could have predicted that events were about to take a tragic and shocking turn. What happened next would not only stun the world, but would also ignite questions that continue more than a decade later. When news broke that Michael Jackson had passed away in June 2009, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Around the world, fans struggled to process what they were hearing. Television networks interrupted programming. Crowds gathered outside hospitals and memorial locations. Social media platforms exploded with reactions as people searched desperately for answers. It wasn't simply the loss of a music icon. For many, it felt like the end of an era. Almost immediately, attention shifted toward understanding exactly what had happened during Michael's final hours. Investigations followed, details emerged, and the public learned about the medical circumstances surrounding his death. Eventually, Michael's personal physician, Conrad Murray, became one of the central figures in the story. Court proceedings and extensive media coverage brought new information into public view, leading to legal consequences that were reported worldwide. Yet, despite official findings, many supporters remained unconvinced that every question had been answered. The circumstances surrounding Michael's passing became fertile ground for theories, speculation, and endless online discussions. Some focused on medical negligence. Others wondered whether larger forces were involved. Still others pointed to Michael's own public statements about pressure, fear, and distrust as reasons to look deeper into the story. Over the years, these discussions have only grown. Every documentary, interview, and newly released piece of information seems to reignite debates among fans and critics alike. What makes the situation particularly unusual is that even people who reject conspiracy theories often admit there are aspects of Michael's final years that remain difficult to fully understand. The combination of fame, money, influence, and tragedy created a story that continues to capture public attention. And then, years later, another scandal involving powerful people would cause many individuals to revisit Michael Jackson's story all over again. For decades, many people assumed that wealth, influence, and celebrity operated in predictable ways. Then the Jeffrey Epstein scandal exploded into public view, changing how millions of people looked at powerful networks forever. As details emerged regarding relationships, connections, and social circles that had remained hidden for years, public trust suffered a major blow. Suddenly, people began asking different questions about the wars inhabited by the wealthy and famous. When Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted for her role within Epstein's operation, those conversations intensified even further. The case forced many individuals to confront the possibility that disturbing activities could remain concealed despite enormous public visibility. As a result, people started re examining countless stories involving celebrities, politicians, executives, and other high profile figures. Michael Jackson's name inevitably found its way into some of those discussions. Not because verified evidence connected him directly to Epstein's crimes, but because the scandal fundamentally changed how people viewed elite environments. Old photographs became subjects of scrutiny. Past relationships were analyzed in new ways.